My name's John Ridley, and I'm late 50s, so getting on a bit, and fifth generation farmer, and here with Bircher, and we live, my wife and I, on home block here, 60 kilometres southwest of Forbes, on the edge of Lake Cowell. So we've got flat, open grazing country and a bit of farming. Well, our family's been farming here since the 1880s. Yeah, so just an evolution. So we've had this for 35 years and been living here for 25 years. Yeah. I suppose I was bred to be a money-making farmer, and agriculture hasn't really been a big money spinner, and so I was focused on the wrong things, and so I got very down about the overdraft, ballooning, and trying to educate 4 kids, and but we had our kids at good church schools in Sydney, and getting assistance from those schools, bursaries and part bursaries and things, so we were very fortunate anyway. So on balance, I mean, I don't know what I was worried about, but and then I started working hard. I thought, well, the only way to beat the overdraft problem is to work harder, and so go out less and spend more time on the farm working and all that sort of thing. And so that's what I did, but of course all that did was make me worse. And then I focused more, and I was doing more in the office and less in the paddock, and the paddock stuff is what I enjoy. So I reached a very low ebb. I knew that I could be happy, it was just a matter of refining it. But I didn't know how to do that. But so eventually I got to such a low ebb after 12 months. I said to Jen, my wife, who's an occupational therapist, and she's been very supportive all the way through, and guiding me and helping me and supporting me through the illness. I said, look, I've just got to go and see the specialist, and I can't get off the couch. I'm buggered, because you think you're the only one in the world with a mental health problem, and then you go to these things, and there's people everywhere. There's a whole industry built with mental health, so you aren't alone. And you aren't a little island in an ocean suffering on your own. You are with other people, and there is a way forward. There's a way for complete recovery, and that's what they keep telling you, and it's right. But you got to believe them. But when you are recovering, you don't feel like it. The hardest thing they talk about is the acceptance of having a mental illness. And I just remember borrowing a radio to listen to the news, and on the radio it had a bit of tape, and on the masking tape was written mental health unit, and having that was sitting next to my bed, and so it's very confronting. Yeah, I've re-evaluated the things that are important in my life and the things that are important in farming, and the reality is that farming, for me, isn't about making stacks of money. I suppose if you want to have stacks and stacks of money, then possibly retrain as a financial planner or a fund manager and go and work at Macquarie Bank and get as rich as rich as rich. So it's a matter of refocusing away from that money thing and coming back to the things that are important, and they're being part of a community, family, and the things that you love about farming is getting lambs on the ground, new lambs, and growing beautiful wool that goes away to be processed and made into nice, beautiful Italian suits, and growing healthy beef, trying to produce food that's very healthy, and so there's so that's and having a nice living away from the city, so you're not hearing all that sort of noise, I'm a lot better for it, without a doubt, yeah. And I'm able to pass on the lessons I've learned in the last 5 years to anyone who wants to listen, and also family and friends. So, and able to watch out for people and say, well, look, if you're not doing well, you should do this or do that. So, when you live in a rural area, then the cycle of life is there in front of you every day. Sheep giving birth, cows having crops growing, and grass is shooting. So here we've had 3 inches of rain last week, and suddenly the seasons burst to life. We're in another. So it comes from the soil, and everything grows up, and that cycle of being in the part of that biological system is what we are too. We're in that system as well, and we're also part of something bigger. And the non-spiritual people will say, "Oh well, no, we're just a person walking around here, and we live and die, and that's it." But I think we're part of something bigger, and I'm not sure what that is really, but certainly my role in that big picture is bumbling around here on the farm and producing a bit of nice wool. And we were born from the soil, and we're part of something bigger, and so there's something deeper going on. But I don't profess to know what all that is really, because we're battling just to do the basics properly. When things have become difficult on the farm, as they have since then and will do in the future, is to not focus on the material losses that might be happening at the time, but to be focusing on the things that are important, which is our family and friends, and to realise that it is a cycle, and we are going to go into bad times, and the bad times will finish, and it will rain, or the flood will abate, and things will come back to normal. And so if you can right the ship and get sailing along in the good times, and maybe and be a little bit more forward thinking, so well, let's put a bit more hay away next time, and let's put a bit more grain away, and let's not worry about buying a new car when things are good, because we don't really need a new car, and it's not that important. We can bumble along with the old one and just be a bit more, and don't stick your neck out too much. Don't try and don't go and borrow heaps of money to try and buy the next farm to be the biggest farmer in the district. That's not what's important at all. It's much more important to have a small farm that's manageable, so that you can concentrate on the things that are important, which is family and friends and life and spirituality. The white Australians who moved early learnt from the Indigenous population who understood these lessons. They'd learned these lessons, and they lived in the environment and realised that they were part of something bigger, and it wasn't for them to rape and pillage the country and denude it, but to live in the environment and to swim with the current almost. And so I think our settlers learnt from the Indigenous peoples, and I still think we've got a lot to learn. We've still got a lot to learn from the Indigenous people. They taught us during this clinic that I was at in the hospital, all these little things that you have to learn to do and redo, and laughing and doing fun things, and teasing each other and joking around is very, very important. And you can get yourself sidetracked and think, no, I'm going to keep focused, no, I'm going to keep working hard, and if as soon as I deviate, well, that's retracting from the things about making money. But that's, you've got to stop and laugh, and you've got to laugh at yourself, and anyone who can't see the funny side, well, they've got a few issues themselves. They need to lighten up. So you can't take the money with you, and unfortunately you can't take the debt with you either.
Thank you very much, Johnny and Dawn. My name's Frank Brennan. I'm a city slicker. And might I start by joining you in acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. And I must say, for me, it was great to have Ellie from Redbank there, a student in her finest uniform, speaking to us in Wiradjuri. Who'd have thought that would ever happen? So Ellie, thank you very much. And a sign of things to come in this country, I dare say. I'd like to start reflecting on Johnny's story and Dawn's a long way away. I once was in Rome and I was visiting an Australian priest. He's now a bishop actually, not this one, but he was doing a flash degree over there. He just finished it that day and he took me on a drive to a place called Subiaco. And that was where there was a cave where St. Benedict lived in that cave for some time before moving into a monastery. And on the way back from this quite moving visit to this very spiritual place, we stopped and looked out from a mountain down into a beautiful valley. And unlike the land that Johnny's on, every square inch of it was cultivated. And I said to this guy, I better not give his name, I said, "Are you looking forward to coming back to Australia?" He said, "Oh, I don't know." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, here in Europe, you know, culture sometimes triumphs over nature." He said, "But in Australia, it never does." And that's an idea that has stayed with me ever since. This was many years ago, that the nature of which we're part here, it's just so vast, isn't it? I mean, it's a big brown land. And the sense we have of horizons is just so different from what it is in parts of Europe. And of course, in the cities, we lose a lot of it. But I think out here in the long paddock, you've got a lot of that here. I'm very aware that I'm just a visitor here. And in fact, it was very moving, Dawn, seeing you there in St. Ignatius Church. I don't know whether you remember, but the first time I ever came to Burke, Paul O'Donnell was the parish priest at the time. And he invited me to come because there were a few tensions in the school playground between the Aboriginal kids and the other kids. And he picked me up at the airport and he drove me straight into the school grounds. And he introduced me to one of the white teachers. And I greeted her and he told her a little bit about me. And so she looked at me and she said, "So you're a blow-in?" And I thought, oh God, this is going to be quite a day. Anyway, we then went into the staff room and we were there with the teachers and quite a number of Aboriginal teacher aides. And I was introduced and he graciously introduced me listing all sorts of qualifications, which I could see was not a very good look. And so I immediately said, "Look, Father Paul has left out the most critical thing you need to know about me, that is that I'm a blow-in." I said, "Now, I've been asked here because I've been told that relations aren't too good at the moment, whether you're an adult walking down the street or a kid in the convent playground." Said, "So let's have some conversation about that." And we had a great day together, and then that evening we had a night in the St. Ignatius Church. And people, Aboriginal, others, came together and told their stories, much as Dawn and Johnny have told theirs this morning. Very different sorts of stories, but very respectful listening. And for me, that was a wonderful first experience of coming to this part of the world. I remember then in 1993, many of you will remember the great Fred Hollows when he died. And I was involved with Fred's funeral. It was mainly at St Mary's Cathedral in Sydney, very flash show, lots of politicians and lots of people with pointy hats and all that sort of thing. But then we got on a couple of planes and flew out here to Burke for the burial. and it was there in the Burke Cemetery because Fred always felt most at home here in this, the land of the long paddock, I suppose you'd say. And I remember, in fact, I have a photo on my wall in my office in Canberra. At the graveside, an old Aboriginal woman you would have known at dawn, old Auntie Katie Yulo from Angonia, I think, came up and just embraced Gabby at the graveside. And just this beautiful sight of these two women grieving together, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, and all of that had gone on in St Mary's Cathedral just seemed so distant from what we were looking at there. And I think listening to you, Johnny, where, I mean, you reflect on how all of us are connected to the land, to country, how all of us are connected to something that's much bigger, and we're all confronting ultimately the mystery. And yes, we've been brought up in a culture where the individualistic, the materialistic, it gets us by for so long. But once we get to the edge of what's known and knowable, then that's when we start to embrace the mystery of it. And that can be very daunting, but it can also be quite inviting. One of you, Vince, I think, who was here, you were reminding me that I once told a story out here. It was a few years after 93, it was 98 in fact, and the great Nugget Coombs died, who was a great Australian, and we had his funeral also in St Mary's Cathedral. And a few weeks before, I'd been at Sydney Airport, and Gough Whitlam offered me a lift to my office, and I'd just flown in from the Kimberley, so I had a bag of fresh mangoes with me. So I said to him, do you like mangoes? He said, I do, and Margaret loves them. So I gave him the mangoes. And anyway, when we had the funeral at St Mary's, it was all a bit tense. John Howard was the Prime Minister, and Pat Dodson, a leading Aboriginal leader, was to give a eulogy, and there were a lot of political tensions, which I won't go into, and we were on the phone to all sorts of people before the church service started. And at the last minute, I got out to the front of the cathedral, and they're all walking up the steps, and Prime Minister Howard came, and we were very formal with each other. And then Gough walked up, and he said to me, Father, the mangoes were magnificent. And I think, as Johnny is suggesting, that for us Australians, I think the humour is important. It's the little things that can create the humour. And I think there we can move forward together. And as Johnny was also saying, it's about community and relationships. I remember another very tense time coming here at the time of all the WIC business. And I flew into Angonia in a little plane. A mate of mine, a lawyer from Brisbane, had a plane, and he said, you need to get out and talk to some of these pastoralists. I said, oh yeah, well, all right. So we were flying around all Western New South Wales and Western Queensland, and the atmosphere was a bit tense. And we got to this homestead there outside Angonia. We'd flown in on their strip, and I walked into the room, and a guy sitting in the corner said to me, you should get back to your presbytery and say your prayers. And I thought, oh dear, this is not going to be too good. But it was a great lesson for me, because as I said to him, I said, well, something like this WIC business, I don't think it can be solved by prayer alone, but I do think prayer is important. But prayer without that relationship, without that engagement, without the sharing of the stories, I think just gets us nowhere. And as I'm privileged to be here listening to you, Dawn, and to you, Johnny, I mean, I know, even though I'm a city slicker, that, I mean, life in this part of the world is tough, and it's been a very tough history, but you've got your humour, you've got your songs, you've got your community, and these things then allow us to hear, as if for the first time, what are the deep spiritual messages. And I think we often, as Australians, we do it in a very self-effacing way, don't we? And I don't think it's any embarrassment to Johnny to say that I mean, unless you'd been through the Depression, I don't think you'd be sharing your story about spiritual insights with anybody. And yet, somehow going into the valley of death or darkness, you can come out and share this light. And it's not only a light that you have for yourself, but it's a light that we share together. And I think that the spiritual message of all of this is that, yes, we live in a society and in a time at the moment where that sharing is very difficult, in part because of the things Johnny highlighted, that we're so individualistic and we're so materialistic, and we definitely don't expect blokes to be talking about these sorts of things, at least in polite company, and particularly not in impolite company in Australia, and particularly not out in the bush. But it's then when we hear it that, from those sources, that we know that it's fair dinkum. It's not just put on. That if you heard it from father or sister or whatever, it tends to wash over a bit. But when you hear it from Dawn and from Johnny, there's a depth and a reality to it, which I think is very significant. So thank you. For me, one of the challenges about spirituality for us in Australia today, particularly in the Catholic Church, you know, we've taken a very justifiable thrashing with the Royal Commission and everything that's been going on. But I think there are also deeper issues about what is the place of church or institutional religion in Australia. Think only of your own children, their generation. Notions of tradition and authority and community are the things which are most under attack at the moment in our society. Not just talking about churches, but if we look at our religious traditions, often tradition, authority and community are seen to be the pillars that keep it propped up. Whereas in the world of which we're part at the moment, they're the things that have to earn their spurs. They're not just accepted. And that's why I think the individual stories and the respectful listening, as we've been privileged to have with Johnny and with Dawn so far this morning, I think they're very constitutive of what it's about. For me, particularly when I come bush in Australia, I often go back to the suffering servant song of Isaiah 42. And you might remember, I mean, that great image of the suffering servant who says he doesn't make his voice heard in the streets. You know, he's not like someone like me who's always out there blabbing on the airwaves or whatever, but, you know, sticks to his last, not out there, you know, making loud proclamations or whatever. You know, if we saw Johnny on the corner street of Forbes with a sandwich board saying, "Come and find salvation," we'd all know that we'd actually lost the plot. And that's not what Johnny's about. But what he shared with us today is something which is much deeper, more integrated, and far more true. And it's that you don't get out there and make a big fuss in the streets. And that beautiful image in the Suffering Servant song that he does not break the crushed reed nor quench the wavering flame. And we're all crushed reeds and we're all wavering flames, no matter what our faith might be. You know, even the bishop's a wavering flame. We're all in that situation, but it's in the gentleness and the nurturing of that that there is the hope of new life. And I think that's what we've heard from both Dawn and Johnny today. And the suffering servant who goes on and says that justice is to be proclaimed in the land and it's to be enacted. And I think the great thing is that we've heard the fella who was the white money-making farmer who comes like Dawn with a great respect for the land, for the history, and for the culture of which we're a part. And that's Australian spirituality to me. So thank you for the opportunity.